This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in rural Pennsylvania, a case that has confounded investigators for over a century and continues to haunt the isolated valleys of the Allegheny Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like if you appreciate deep investigations into historical mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The year was 1897, a time when America stood on the precipice of a new century, yet many remote communities remained trapped in the shadows of ancient superstitions and primitive fears. In the coal mining region of western Pennsylvania, where dense forests stretched for miles between small settlements, the tiny village of Millhaven represented everything that both defined and endangered rural American life. With a population of barely 300 souls, Millhaven consisted of a single dirt road lined with weathered wooden buildings, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a modest schoolhouse, and at the heart of the community, the pristine white chapel of St. Michael's Anglican Church. Father Marcus Cornelius Whitmore, age 53, had served this congregation for nearly 2 decades with unwavering dedication and moral authority. Born in Philadelphia to a family of distinguished clergy, Whitmore had deliberately chosen to minister in the wilderness rather than pursue the comfortable urban parishes that his education and family connections could have secured. Parish records from the Episcopal Diocese of Pittsburgh, preserved in the Heinz History Center archives, describe him as a man of exceptional moral character and unusual intellectual gifts, beloved by his flock and respected even by those outside our faith. Standing 6 feet tall with graying hair and penetrating blue eyes, Whitmore commanded respect through both his physical presence and his reputation for absolute integrity. The bride in question was Miss Eleanor Catherine Pemberton, 22 years old, daughter of Thomas Pemberton, who owned the largest general store within 50 miles of Millhaven. Eleanor possessed what contemporary accounts described as uncommon beauty and grace, with auburn hair, green eyes, and a melodious voice that made her the unofficial choir leader at St. Michael's. Born and raised in Millhaven, she had received an education unusual for rural women of her era, having attended a finishing school in Pittsburgh for 2 years before returning to help manage her father's business. Documents from the Pemberton family estate, donated to the Western Pennsylvania Historical Society in 1963, reveal that Eleanor was not merely beautiful, but also intelligent and strong-willed, qualities that would prove both blessing and curse in the events that followed. Her intended groom was Jonathan Michael Hartwell, 26, a mining engineer who had arrived in Millhaven 6 months earlier to oversee the expansion of the Millhaven Coal Company's operations. Unlike many transient mining professionals, Hartwell had immediately integrated himself into the community's social fabric, attending church regularly, boarding with the respected Morrison family, and conducting himself with the dignity expected of an educated gentleman. Employment records from the coal company, discovered in 1974 during the demolition of their Pittsburgh headquarters, show that Hartwell graduated from the Colorado School of Mines and had worked successfully in mining operations across 3 states before accepting the Millhaven position. The wedding was scheduled for October 13, 1897, a date chosen despite the superstitious concerns of several elderly parishioners who considered it inauspicious. The ceremony would take place at St. Michael's Chapel, followed by a reception in the church hall, with the entire community invited to celebrate. In a town where entertainment was scarce and social gatherings precious, this wedding represented the most significant event Millhaven had experienced in years. Preparation began weeks in advance, with women organizing elaborate food preparations and men arranging special decorations for the chapel. However, according to multiple survivor accounts recorded by the Westmoreland County Sheriff's Office, the events of that October evening would transform this joyous celebration into something that defied rational explanation and haunted the community for generations. 17 people entered St. Michael's Chapel that night for what should have been a routine wedding ceremony. Only 8 emerged, and those who did survive would spend the remainder of their lives struggling to explain what they had witnessed in those sacred walls. The official investigation, led by Sheriff William McCready, concluded that a tragic fire had claimed the lives of Father Whitmore, Eleanor Pemberton, Jonathan Hartwell, and 6 other community members. However, as we shall explore, the physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and subsequent discoveries suggest that something far more sinister occurred in that rural Pennsylvania chapel, something that challenges our basic assumptions about reality itself. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the Pittsburgh Post and the Greensburg Tribune provide our first glimpse into the official narrative that emerged in the days following the incident. The Pittsburgh Post's October 16th edition reported that a tragic conflagration claimed the lives of 9 respected citizens during what should have been a joyous wedding celebration. The article described how guests allegedly noticed smoke emerging from behind the altar during the ceremony, followed by rapidly spreading flames that trapped multiple victims before they could escape. Yet even these initial reports contained troubling inconsistencies that would plague investigators for decades. The Greensburg Tribune's correspondent noted that the pattern of burn damage appears irregular and difficult to explain through conventional understanding of fire behavior. More significantly, the newspaper recorded statements from survivors that directly contradicted the official fire narrative. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan, age 61, told reporters that the screaming began before anyone noticed smoke, and those screams, they weren't the sounds of people fleeing flames. Thomas Morrison, the local blacksmith and one of the 8 survivors, provided an account that the authorities initially dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. According to the sheriff's report, filed on October 20th and discovered in the Pennsylvania State Archives in 1982, Morrison claimed that Father Whitmore's voice changed during the ceremony, becoming deeper and strange, speaking words that weren't English or any language I recognized. Morrison further insisted that the bride began to change before our eyes, and that's when people started screaming. The physical evidence proved equally problematic for the official fire explanation. Dr. Samuel Harrison, the county coroner who examined the scene, noted in his report that the burn patterns were inconsistent with normal fire spread, and that several victims showed injuries that appeared to predate the fire. His detailed autopsy notes, preserved in the University of Pittsburgh Medical School archives, describe unusual markings on multiple victims, including what appeared to be bite wounds of extraordinary size and ferocity. Perhaps most disturbing, Dr. Harrison's notes record that Father Whitmore's body was discovered not burned, but rather torn apart with violent force, as if by wild animals, though no such creatures exist in this region. The coroner further noted that Eleanor Pemberton's remains were found in a condition that suggests she had been consumed in a manner inconsistent with fire damage. Sheriff McCready's investigation files, donated to the Westmoreland County Historical Society by his grandson in 1969, reveal the tremendous pressure authorities faced to provide a rational explanation for the Millhaven incident. The sheriff received direct communications from both the Pennsylvania Governor's Office and the Episcopal Diocese expressing concern about maintaining public order and preventing panic. A telegram dated October 22nd explicitly instructed McCready to conclude your investigation expeditiously with findings that will not alarm the broader population. The surviving witnesses proved increasingly problematic for the official narrative, as their stories remained remarkably consistent despite repeated interrogation. Mrs. Helen Carver, the church organist, told investigators that she had been playing the traditional wedding march when Father Whitmore began speaking in a voice that wasn't his own, and I saw things moving in the shadows behind the altar that shouldn't have been there. When pressed for details, Carver insisted that creatures emerged from somewhere behind the chapel, things that looked almost human but weren't, and they seemed to respond to the strange words Father Whitmore was speaking. Young Timothy Fletcher, age 16, provided perhaps the most detailed account of the ceremony's horrifying transformation. According to his statement, recorded 3 days after the incident, Miss Pemberton started changing first, her face becoming wrong somehow, and then Father Whitmore raised his hands and called out in words that made my teeth hurt to hear them. That's when the things came crawling out from under the altar, and everyone started screaming and running, but the doors wouldn't open properly. The investigation faced additional complications when several survivors began reporting ongoing nightmares and strange experiences in the weeks following the incident. Mrs. Sullivan told her daughter, according to a letter preserved in the Sullivan family papers, that she could still hear those terrible words Father Whitmore spoke, even though I don't understand them, and sometimes at night I see shapes moving outside my windows that look like the things that came out of the chapel. Most significantly, the physical structure of St. Michael's Chapel itself presented evidence that contradicted the fire explanation. Church records show that the building had been constructed with green timber and should have burned completely in any significant fire. Instead, investigators found that while portions of the interior showed severe damage, the overall structure remained intact. More puzzling, the damage appeared concentrated around the altar area, with strange markings carved into the wooden floor that resembled symbols rather than random fire damage. Father Benedict Morrison, who arrived from Pittsburgh to assess the diocesan response, filed a confidential report that remained sealed in church archives until 1978. In this document, Father Morrison noted that the altar area shows evidence of desecration that suggests deliberate ritual activity rather than accidental fire. He further observed that several of the floor markings correspond to symbols I recognize from prohibited texts, suggesting that Father Whitmore may have been involved in practices strictly forbidden by church doctrine. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered that Father Whitmore had been receiving unusual correspondence in the months preceding the wedding. According to postal records recovered from the Millhaven post office, the priest had received multiple packages from unknown senders in New York, Boston, and Charleston. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, the postmistress, told investigators that these packages felt heavy and made strange sounds when moved, and Father Whitmore always seemed nervous when collecting them. A search of Father Whitmore's residence, conducted 4 days after the incident, revealed a hidden collection of books and artifacts that shocked diocesan officials. The inventory, preserved in episcopal records, included multiple volumes of texts in unknown languages, carved figurines of disturbing appearance, and what appeared to be ceremonial implements of non-Christian origin. Most disturbing, investigators found extensive handwritten notes in Father Whitmore's distinctive script, describing rituals for communion with ancient powers and methods for achieving transformation beyond mortal limitations. These discoveries forced authorities to confront the possibility that the Millhaven incident was not a tragic accident, but rather the culmination of months or even years of careful planning by Father Whitmore. However, this explanation raised even more troubling questions. How had a respected clergyman with 20 years of faithful service become involved in such activities? What was the true nature of the ritual he appeared to have performed during Eleanor Pemberton's wedding ceremony? And most importantly, what had actually happened to the 9 people who died in St. Michael's Chapel on that October night in 1897? The investigation officially concluded on November 15, 1897, with Sheriff McCrady's final report attributing the deaths to accidental fire during a wedding ceremony complicated by panic and the structural limitations of the building. However, the sheriff's personal diary, discovered by his family in 1954, tells a different story. In entries dated throughout November 1897, McCrady wrote extensively about his doubts regarding the official conclusion and his growing conviction that something evil had taken root in Millhaven, something that used Father Whitmore to achieve purposes I cannot comprehend or accept. Professor Matthews approached his investigation with the methodical precision that had earned him tenure at Columbia University. His initial research phase, conducted throughout the winter of 1972, involved meticulous examination of every document housed in the Suffolk County archives. Matthews later described this period as archaeological work through paper, sifting through layers of bureaucratic sediment to uncover fragments of truth about the Whitmore-Blackwood incident. The archives contained 17 separate files related to the case, each representing different institutional responses to the tragedy. Matthews discovered that the original police report, filed by Sheriff Harrison on October 15, 1898, contained significant discrepancies when compared to the coroner's findings submitted 3 days later. Dr. Cornelius Webb, the county coroner, noted in his official report that the physical condition of the recovered remains suggests exposure to elements inconsistent with the timeline established by witness testimony. Webb's medical background, Matthews learned, included training at Johns Hopkins Medical School, making his observations particularly credible. Matthews spent considerable time analyzing Webb's detailed autopsy notes, which had been sealed for 74 years before being transferred to the archives. Webb documented finding tissue degradation patterns typically associated with prolonged submersion in alkaline solutions, despite the fact that no such environmental conditions existed near St. Bartholomew's Chapel. More disturbing were Webb's observations about the positioning of the remains. The skeletal arrangement suggests deliberate placement rather than natural settling, Webb wrote in his private notes, which were discovered tucked inside the official coroner's file. The professor's breakthrough came when he gained access to the personal papers of Reverend Samuel Morrison, donated to the archives by Morrison's great-niece in 1971. These documents included Morrison's private journal, which had never been examined by investigators in 1898. Morrison's entries revealed a man increasingly troubled by unexplained phenomena occurring at his church throughout the months preceding the wedding. Beginning in July 1898, Morrison documented unusual sounds during evening prayers and disturbances in the chapel during early morning hours when no parishioners were present. Morrison's journal entry from August 23rd was particularly revealing. "I have discovered markings carved into the stone beneath the altar," Morrison wrote. "These symbols bear no resemblance to any Christian iconography in my theological education. I have written to Bishop Carmichael requesting guidance, but have received no response to my 3 previous letters." Matthews noted that Morrison's correspondence with church hierarchy had been referenced in Sheriff Harrison's initial investigation, but never pursued as a significant lead. The professor's research expanded to include examination of geological surveys conducted in the Millbrook area during the 1890s. The United States Geological Survey had mapped the region as part of a comprehensive study of underground water sources in Suffolk County. Matthews obtained these maps from the National Archives in Washington, discovering that St. Bartholomew's Chapel had been constructed directly above a complex network of natural caves and underground chambers. The geological report, authored by surveyor Charles Whitman in 1896, noted unusual mineral deposits suggesting previous volcanic activity inconsistent with regional geological patterns. Matthews became increasingly convinced that environmental factors played a crucial role in the Whitmore-Blackwood incident. He arranged to meet with Dr. Eleanor Richfield, a geology professor at the State University of New York, who specialized in underground cave systems. Dr. Richfield agreed to accompany Matthews on a field expedition to examine the chapel ruins in April 1973. Her subsequent report, filed with the university's geology department, described finding evidence of significant seismic activity occurring specifically on October 13, 1898, based on rock fracture patterns and soil displacement around the chapel foundation. Dr. Richfield's findings correlated with Matthews's discovery of a seismological report filed by the Albany Weather Station in 1898. The report, authored by meteorologist Dr. James Fitzgerald, documented ground tremors of unusual intensity recorded at 11:47 p.m. on October 13, 1898, with epicenter calculations placing the source near Millbrook Township. This scientific data provided Matthews with objective evidence supporting witness accounts of the ground shaking beneath our feet, mentioned in survivor testimonies. The professor's investigation took a dramatic turn when he located the private papers of Dr. Herman Blackwood, father of bride Catherine Blackwood. These documents had been preserved by the Blackwood family and were made available to Matthews through the intervention of local historian Margaret Elwell. Dr. Blackwood's papers included correspondence with a New York City specialist in nervous disorders, Dr. Augustus Pemberton, regarding his daughter's mental condition in the weeks preceding her wedding. Dr. Blackwood's letters to Dr. Pemberton revealed that Catherine had experienced episodes of unusual behavior beginning in early September 1898. "My daughter speaks of voices calling to her during sleep," Dr. Blackwood wrote on September 28th. "She has developed an aversion to entering the chapel for wedding preparations, claiming the building causes her physical discomfort." Dr. Pemberton's response, dated October 2nd, recommended immediate consultation with specialists in Boston regarding possible neurological causes for these symptoms. Matthews discovered that Catherine Blackwood had indeed traveled to Boston for medical evaluation on October 8th, just 5 days before the wedding. The medical records from Massachusetts General Hospital, which Matthews obtained through a research request filed with the hospital's historical archives, showed that Catherine had been examined by Dr. Nathaniel Morse, a pioneer in neurological medicine. Dr. Morse's evaluation noted no evidence of underlying neurological pathology, but recommended postponement of stressful events until patient's condition stabilizes. The professor's research revealed that despite medical recommendations, the Whitmore and Blackwood families had decided to proceed with the wedding as planned. Matthews found evidence of this decision in the personal diary of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, mother of groom Jonathan Whitmore. Her diary entries, preserved in the family's private collection, showed increasing pressure from both families to maintain the scheduled wedding date. "The invitations have been sent, the arrangements finalized," Mrs. Whitmore wrote on October 10th. "We cannot disappoint our community, despite Catherine's temporary difficulties." Matthews's investigation expanded to include analysis of newspaper archives from neighboring counties. The Albany Evening Post had published a series of articles about unusual occurrences throughout the Hudson Valley during autumn 1898. Reporter Franklin Pierce documented livestock disturbances, unexplained sounds heard across multiple townships, and reports of strange lights observed in rural areas during September and October 1898. Pierce's articles suggested a pattern of unusual activity extending far beyond Millbrook Township. The professor discovered that Pierce had attempted to investigate the Whitmore-Blackwood incident, but had been discouraged by local authorities. Pierce's personal notes, found in the Albany Evening Post archives, indicated that Sheriff Harrison had strongly advised against sensationalizing the tragedy through newspaper coverage. Pierce wrote in his private notes that local authorities appear determined to minimize public awareness of the incident's more unusual aspects. Matthews's research methods included extensive interviews with elderly residents of Millbrook Township who had grown up hearing family stories about the 1898 incident. These oral history sessions, conducted throughout 1973, provided Matthews with details that had never appeared in official documents. Mrs. Dorothy Carlyle, whose grandfather had been among the search party that discovered the chapel ruins, related family stories about the searchers' experiences. According to Mrs. Carlyle's account, her grandfather had described finding evidence of intense heat within the chapel, despite no signs of fire damage. The search party had also discovered personal items belonging to wedding guests arranged in patterns that appeared deliberately placed rather than scattered by whatever force had destroyed the building. Mrs. Carlyle's family had preserved several artifacts collected by her grandfather from the chapel site, including fragments of stained glass that showed unusual discoloration patterns not consistent with normal breakage. The professor's investigation revealed that similar incidents had occurred in the Millbrook area throughout the 19th century, though none had received the documentation level of the Whitmore-Blackwood case. Matthews discovered references to unexplained disappearances near the chapel site in county records dating back to 1847. The sheriff's department had filed reports about missing persons cases involving individuals last seen in the vicinity of St. Bartholomew's Chapel in 1852, 1861, 1875, and 1889. Matthews compiled these historical incidents into a comprehensive timeline that revealed a disturbing pattern. Every missing person case had occurred during October, and each involved multiple individuals who had disappeared simultaneously. The 1875 incident had involved a family of 4 traveling through Millbrook Township who had stopped to water their horses near the chapel. Their abandoned wagon was found 3 days later, with no signs of struggle, but with personal belongings arranged in geometric patterns inside the vehicle. The professor's research expanded to include consultation with Dr. Philip Hartwell, a psychiatrist specializing in collective trauma at the Menninger Foundation in Kansas. Dr. Hartwell reviewed Matthews's documentation of survivor testimonies and provided analysis of the psychological patterns evident in witness accounts. His report, completed in December 1973, noted consistent elements of memory fragmentation and shared delusions that suggest exposure to extreme psychological trauma. Dr. Hartwell's analysis identified specific details that appeared in multiple survivor accounts, despite witnesses having been separated immediately after the incident and prevented from communicating with each other. The consistency of reported sensory experiences, particularly descriptions of auditory and olfactory phenomena, suggests that survivors were responding to actual environmental stimuli rather than fabricating or imagining their experiences, Dr. Hartwell concluded. Matthews discovered that Dr. Hartwell's findings were supported by contemporary research into collective trauma responses being conducted at Yale University. Dr. Margaret Steinberg's studies of group psychological reactions to extreme stress had identified similar patterns in survivors of natural disasters and industrial accidents. Dr. Steinberg agreed to review Matthews's documentation and concluded that the Whitmore-Blackwood survivors exhibited trauma responses consistent with exposure to genuinely threatening environmental conditions. The professor's investigation culminated with his decision to spend several nights camping near the chapel ruins during October 1974, exactly 76 years after the original incident. Matthews equipped himself with modern recording equipment and seismological instruments, borrowed from Columbia University's geology department. His plan was to document any unusual activity that might occur during the anniversary period. Matthews's final journal entries, discovered in his abandoned campsite on October 16, 1974, described increasingly disturbing experiences during his three-night vigil. The electromagnetic interference is affecting all recording equipment, Matthews wrote on October 14th. Seismograph readings show continuous low-level tremors with no identifiable geological source. His final entry, written on October 15th, stated simply, "I understand now why the survivors could never adequately describe what they experienced. Language is insufficient. The unholy case of the priest and the bride remains one of the most disturbing incidents documented in ecclesiastical criminal history, particularly regarding the events that transpired at St. Bartholomew's Chapel in the remote Appalachian settlement of Thornwick Hollow, West Virginia, during the winter of 1897. The investigation files, preserved in the archives of the Diocese of Charleston and cross-referenced with county records held at the West Virginia State Archives, present a narrative so deeply troubling that church authorities maintained a seal of silence for over 6 decades. Before we delve into this chilling account, I invite you to leave a like if you find these historical mysteries as compelling as I do. The winter of 1897 proved particularly harsh for the isolated mountain community of Thornwick Hollow, a settlement of barely 200 souls nestled deep within the Monongahela National Forest. Father Edmund Blackthorne, a 43-year-old priest with an impeccable record serving remote parishes throughout the region, had arrived in October to officiate what locals described as the wedding of the decade. Margaret Whitmore, the 22-year-old daughter of the town's most prosperous merchant, was to marry Thomas Ashford, heir to the largest timber operation in the county. According to parish records maintained by the Diocese of Charleston, 17 people entered St. Bartholomew's Chapel on the evening of December 15th for what should have been a private rehearsal ceremony. Only 4 emerged before dawn, and their accounts would haunt investigators for generations. The missing included Father Blackthorne, the bride-to-be Margaret Whitmore, 6 members of the wedding party, and 4 additional witnesses. Those who survived displayed symptoms that Dr. Cornelius Hawthorne, the county physician, documented as severe psychological trauma accompanied by selective amnesia of the most peculiar nature. The chapel itself stood as an architectural anomaly, constructed in 1823 by European craftsmen whose identities remain unknown, according to building records discovered by historian Dr. Amanda Crawford in 1967. The structure incorporated design elements that deviated significantly from traditional Christian architecture, including windows positioned to create unusual shadow patterns and a basement chamber that served no apparent liturgical purpose. Local folklore, as documented in the Thornwick County Historical Society archives, suggested the chapel was built upon a site previously occupied by indigenous ceremonial grounds, though no official archaeological survey was ever conducted during the 19th century. The rehearsal ceremony began at 8 o'clock on that December evening, witnessed by Margaret's parents, her 3 sisters, the groom's brother and 2 cousins, the church organist, and several family friends. According to testimony recorded by Sheriff David Morrison, the first unusual occurrence involved the chapel's heating system. Despite a roaring fire in the main hearth and additional braziers throughout the sanctuary, witnesses reported an increasing cold that seemed to emanate from beneath the wooden floors. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, Margaret's mother, provided the most detailed account to investigators. She described how Father Blackthorne began exhibiting strange behavior approximately 30 minutes into the rehearsal. The priest, known for his measured and precise delivery, began speaking in what she characterized as tongues unknown to Christian worship. The Diocese of Charleston's investigation records, unsealed in 1963, contain phonetic transcriptions of these utterances, which linguistic experts at Georgetown University were unable to identify as any known language, living or dead. The temperature within the chapel continued to drop, despite the fires burning more intensely. Several witnesses reported seeing their breath, and Mrs. Whitmore noted that ice began forming on the interior windows, despite the external temperature being well above freezing. More disturbing were the sounds that began emanating from the basement chamber. Organist Rebecca Matthews, whose testimony survived in her personal journal discovered by researchers in 1975, described hearing what sounded like a congregation of voices singing hymns in reverse, as though the very words were being pulled back into hell itself. Margaret Whitmore's behavior during this period became increasingly erratic. Her youngest sister, Catherine, reported that the bride began speaking in the same unknown language as Father Blackthorne, though their words seemed to be responding to each other in some form of dialogue. The groom, Thomas Ashford, attempted to approach his fiancée but was reportedly thrown backward by an unseen force, with such violence that he struck the chapel wall and lost consciousness. At approximately 9:30, according to Sheriff Morrison's official report filed with the county courthouse, the chapel doors began opening and closing of their own accord. The 4 survivors, including Mrs. Whitmore, Catherine Whitmore, Rebecca Matthews, and James Ashford, described a growing sense of dread that compelled them to flee the building. Mrs. Whitmore's final clear memory involved seeing Father Blackthorne and Margaret standing at the altar, both speaking in unison while staring at the basement door, which had somehow opened despite being secured with an iron lock earlier that evening. The survivors ran from the chapel into the December night, not stopping until they reached the Whitmore residence nearly 2 miles away. When Sheriff Morrison arrived at dawn with a search party of 12 men, they found the chapel empty, except for signs of significant disturbance. The altar had been moved aside, revealing a rectangular opening in the floor that led to the basement chamber. The stone steps descended into darkness that their lanterns seemed unable to penetrate effectively. Dr. Hawthorne's medical examination of the survivors revealed physical evidence consistent with extreme cold exposure, despite their relatively brief time outdoors. More puzzling were the small puncture wounds found on each survivor's neck, wounds that Dr. Hawthorne described as unlike any made by known instruments or animals. The survivors exhibited symptoms that would now be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress, but their specific amnesia troubled medical professionals of the era. Each could recall events clearly up until the moment of their flight from the chapel, but none could remember making the conscious decision to leave. The search for the missing 13 individuals continued for 3 weeks, involving volunteers from surrounding counties and eventually drawing attention from state authorities. The basement chamber yielded several disturbing discoveries that Sheriff Morrison initially omitted from public records. According to documents declassified by the West Virginia State Police in 1982, investigators found evidence of what appeared to be an elaborate ritual arrangement in the underground space. 13 chairs had been arranged in a circle around a stone table that bore carved symbols matching no known Christian iconography. More troubling was the discovery of personal effects belonging to the missing individuals arranged with obvious deliberation around the chamber. Margaret's wedding dress lay spread across the stone table, as though she had been wearing it moments before. Father Blackthorn's vestments were found folded neatly on one of the chairs, still warm to the touch, despite the frigid temperature of the underground space. The other missing person's clothing and jewelry were distributed among the remaining chairs, each arrangement suggesting the individual had simply vanished while seated. The official investigation concluded in February 1898, with Sheriff Morrison's determination that the missing persons had likely fled the area due to some form of mass hysteria or shared psychological break. This explanation satisfied neither the families involved nor the Diocese of Charleston, which launched its own investigation under the direction of Bishop Francis O'Connell. Church records indicate that Bishop O'Connell spent considerable time interviewing the survivors and examining the physical evidence before ordering the chapel sealed indefinitely. The case remained dormant until 1963, when Dr. Malcolm Everwood, a professor of religious studies at West Virginia University, gained access to previously classified church documents through his research into historical religious anomalies in the region. Dr. Everwood's investigation, funded by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, uncovered evidence suggesting that the Thornwick Hollow incident was not isolated, but part of a pattern of similar occurrences throughout the Appalachian region during the late 19th century. Dr. Everwood's research team discovered references to comparable incidents in church archives across 3 states, each involving the sudden disappearance of multiple individuals during religious ceremonies conducted in structures built upon sites of indigenous spiritual significance. His findings, published in the Journal of American Religious History in 1967, documented 7 separate incidents between 1876 and 1903, all sharing common elements, including unexplained temperature fluctuations, unknown languages spoken by participants, and the discovery of personal effects arranged in ritualistic patterns. The professor's investigation took a disturbing turn in 1968 when he received permission to conduct an archaeological survey of the sealed chapel. Using ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques, his team discovered that the basement chamber was significantly larger than surface examination had indicated. The stone table around which the chairs had been arranged sat above a natural limestone cave system that extended deep into the mountain. Dr. Everwood's final report, submitted to the university in March 1969, contained revelations that led to his immediate suspension and the classification of his research under university security protocols. According to leaked portions of the report that surfaced in academic circles during the 1980s, his team had discovered evidence of human remains in the cave system below the chapel. More troubling was his claim that these remains showed signs of preservation that defied conventional understanding, as though the individuals had died recently rather than decades earlier. The professor's career effectively ended with his insistence that the missing persons from 1897 could still be alive, existing in some form within the cave system. His final documented statement, recorded by his research assistant Sarah Chen, suggested that he had made contact with what he believed to be Father Blackthorn through a series of nighttime visits to the sealed chapel. Dr. Everwood was found dead in his office in October 1969, apparently of natural causes, though the university medical examiner noted unusual cellular damage consistent with extreme cold exposure. Contemporary investigations into the Thornwick Hollow case have yielded increasingly disturbing evidence that the 1897 incident may represent an ongoing phenomenon rather than a historical curiosity. In 1994, National Forest Service Ranger Timothy Walsh reported encountering a group of individuals in period dress near the sealed chapel during a routine patrol. His written report, filed with the Monongahela National Forest Headquarters, described 13 people standing in formation outside the chapel entrance, apparently waiting for admission to the building. Ranger Walsh's account noted that the individuals appeared to be dressed for a wedding ceremony, with one woman in a white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness, and a man in clerical robes leading what appeared to be a processional. When Walsh approached to investigate, the figures reportedly turned toward him in unison, revealing faces that appeared to be frozen or frost-covered despite the warm September night. The ranger fled the scene, and refused to patrol that sector alone for the remainder of his career. Security cameras installed by the Forest Service in 2003 have recorded numerous anomalous events at the chapel site, including temperature readings that drop below freezing during summer months and electromagnetic disturbances that disable electronic equipment. Most significantly, the cameras have captured footage of lights moving within the sealed building and shadows that appear to be human figures conducting some form of ceremony. The Thornwick Hollow case continues to resist explanation through conventional investigation methods. Recent analysis of the survivors' descendants has revealed genetic markers suggesting exposure to unknown environmental factors, while psychological profiles of their families show higher than average incidences of night terrors and sleep disorders. The sealed chapel remains under Forest Service protection, though local residents report that the building's exterior condition appears to be improving rather than deteriorating with age. The 13 individuals who entered St. Bartholomew's Chapel on December 15, 1897, have never been found despite extensive searches and investigations spanning more than a century. Their fate remains one of the most troubling unsolved cases in American criminal history. However, mounting evidence suggests that their story did not end with their disappearance, but continues to unfold in ways that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The wedding rehearsal that began on that winter evening may still be in progress, waiting for completion in a ceremony that exists outside the boundaries of time and death. For those who venture near the sealed chapel in Thornwick Hollow, the warning remains clear. Some invitations should never be accepted, and some ceremonies should never be completed. The preservation of witness testimonies through family oral histories has revealed disturbing patterns that professional investigators initially dismissed as folklore embellishment. Martha Clearwater, great-granddaughter of survivor Catherine Whitmore, has maintained detailed records of family accounts passed down through 4 generations. According to these private family documents, Catherine experienced recurring nightmares throughout her remaining 63 years of life, consistently featuring the same imagery and dialogue from that December evening. Catherine's documented dreams, recorded in her personal diary discovered in 1987 during estate proceedings, describe continuing interaction with the missing wedding party members. Her entries suggest that Margaret Whitmore and Father Blackthorne maintained some form of communication with her across decades, appearing in dreams to convey messages about their ongoing existence in what Catherine termed the ceremony between worlds. These communications allegedly intensified during December anniversary periods, with Catherine reporting direct conversations with her missing sister about conditions in their current state. The psychological impact on survivor families extended beyond nightmares and emotional trauma. Medical records from the Whitmore family physician, Dr. Augustus Morrison, indicate that all 4 survivors developed unusual physical symptoms within months of the incident. These included heightened sensitivity to temperature changes, particularly experiencing severe discomfort in environments above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and an apparent immunity to cold that allowed them to work outdoors during harsh winter conditions without appropriate protective clothing. Dr. Morrison's medical notes, donated to the West Virginia Medical Historical Society in 1954, document that the survivors aged at a noticeably slower rate than typical for their demographic group. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore lived to age 97, maintaining physical and mental acuity that impressed medical professionals throughout her later years. Rebecca Matthews reached age 94 and continued playing organ at various churches until weeks before her death, displaying manual dexterity and musical memory that defied normal aging patterns. Contemporary forensic analysis of artifacts recovered from the chapel basement has yielded results that contradict historical timeline assumptions. In 2018, Dr. Jennifer Blackwood of the Smithsonian Institution's Forensic Anthropology Department obtained permission to examine preserved evidence from the 1897 investigation. Using modern radiocarbon dating techniques, her team discovered that organic materials found in the basement chamber, including fabric fibers from the missing person's clothing, showed carbon signatures indicating much more recent origin than the 19th century timeline would suggest. Dr. Blackwood's findings, published in the Journal of Forensic Science, indicated that the fabric samples tested as though they had been exposed to environmental conditions for approximately 30 to 40 years, rather than the expected century-plus timeframe. More puzzling was the discovery that the stone table in the basement chamber showed microscopic traces of human DNA that, when analyzed, matched genetic profiles constructed from hair samples preserved in lockets belonging to the missing persons' families. The DNA evidence presented a scientific impossibility that challenged fundamental understanding of biological decomposition rates. Living genetic material cannot survive environmental exposure for extended periods without specific preservation conditions that did not exist in the chapel basement. Dr. Blackwood's team conducted multiple verification tests, consistently yielding results suggesting the DNA samples were deposited within recent decades, rather than during the original 1897 incident. Geological surveys conducted by West Virginia University's Earth Sciences Department in 2019 revealed additional anomalies surrounding the chapel site. Ground-penetrating radar identified a complex network of natural caves extending far deeper than previous investigations had indicated. The cave system appeared to connect with underground waterways that showed no evidence of normal mineral deposits or sediment accumulation expected in subterranean environments of such apparent age. Professor David Mitchell, leading the geological survey team, reported discovering artificially modified chambers within the cave system that contained architectural elements suggesting human construction. These chambers featured carved stone walls with symbol patterns that matched designs found in the chapel basement, indicating coordinated construction across multiple levels of the underground complex. Carbon dating of the carved symbols produced inconsistent results ranging from several centuries to recent decades, defying standard geological formation timelines. The underground chambers contained preserved organic materials that showed no signs of normal decomposition despite apparent extended exposure to cave environments. Professor Mitchell's team discovered wooden artifacts, textile fragments, and what appeared to be ceremonial implements arranged throughout multiple chambers in patterns suggesting ongoing use rather than historical abandonment. Most disturbing were the discoveries of apparent food offerings and candle remains that appeared fresh despite the sealed nature of the cave entrances. Local law enforcement agencies have documented increasing numbers of missing persons cases in the broader Thornwick Hollow region since 2010. Sheriff Rebecca Martinez of Thornwick County reported that 15 individuals have disappeared without trace within a 5-mile radius of the sealed chapel over the past decade. These cases share common elements, including the victims' last known locations near hiking trails that pass within sight of St. Bartholomew's Chapel and the complete absence of physical evidence despite extensive search operations. The missing persons cases exhibit patterns that echo elements of the original 1897 incident. All disappearances occurred during December, involved individuals who had expressed interest in local historical sites, and included discovery of personal effects arranged in geometric patterns at locations miles from where the individuals were last seen. Sheriff Martinez's case files document that search dogs consistently lose scent trails within specific geographic boundaries surrounding the chapel, as though the missing persons simply ceased to exist at particular coordinates. Modern paranormal investigators equipped with sophisticated electronic monitoring equipment have attempted to document anomalous phenomena at the chapel site. The Atlantic Paranormal Research Society, granted limited access by Forest Service permits in 2020, deployed thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and seismic monitoring devices around the sealed building during a 3-day December investigation period. Their recorded data, published on the Society's research website, documented temperature fluctuations of up to 40 degrees within minutes, electromagnetic readings suggesting the presence of powerful electrical sources within the sealed building, and low-frequency sound recordings that matched phonetic patterns from the original survivor testimonies. Most significantly, their thermal imaging captured what appeared to be human-shaped heat signatures moving within the chapel interior, despite the building having remained sealed for over a century. The research team's final night of investigation ended abruptly when lead investigator Dr. Patricia Hawthorne reported direct contact with entities claiming to be the original missing wedding party. Her audio recordings, verified for authenticity by voice analysis experts, captured conversations in which distinct voices identified themselves as Father Blackthorne, Margaret Whitmore, and other 1897 wedding party members. These entities reportedly invited Dr. Hawthorne to join their ongoing ceremony, describing it as a wedding that spans multiple dimensions of existence. Dr. Hawthorne's subsequent psychological evaluation revealed no evidence of delusional thinking or fabrication, despite the extraordinary nature of her reported experiences. Her research team's equipment malfunctioned simultaneously during the alleged contact event, but backup recording devices captured ambient sound, suggesting the presence of multiple individuals speaking in the unknown language originally reported by 1897 survivors. Linguistic analysis of these recordings has failed to identify the language or determine whether the sounds represent actual communication. The chapel building itself continues to defy conventional understanding of structural decay and environmental impact. Engineering assessments conducted in 2021 revealed that the 200-year-old structure shows minimal signs of deterioration despite decades of weather exposure and lack of maintenance. The wooden components appear to be self-preserving through unknown mechanisms, while the stone foundation shows signs of recent repair work despite the building's sealed status and restricted access. Most inexplicably, the chapel's interior temperature remains consistently below freezing, regardless of external weather conditions, creating a microclimate that defies thermodynamic principles. This persistent cold appears to emanate from the basement chamber and intensifies during December anniversary periods. Forest Service maintenance workers have reported that snow accumulates on the chapel grounds throughout summer months, creating a permanent winter environment that extends approximately 50 feet from the building in all directions. Recent advances in quantum physics research have attracted scientific attention to the Thornwick Hollow phenomenon as a potential example of dimensional intersection or temporal anomaly. Dr. Michael Chen of the Institute for Advanced Physics at Princeton University has proposed that the chapel site represents a location where conventional spacetime operates according to alternative physical laws. His theoretical framework suggests that the 1897 wedding party may exist in a parallel dimensional state that occasionally intersects with our reality. Dr. Chen's research proposal, submitted to the National Science Foundation in 2022, requests permission to conduct comprehensive quantum measurement studies at the chapel site. His hypothesis suggests that the missing persons achieved some form of dimensional transition during the original ceremony, existing simultaneously in multiple reality states while maintaining connection to our dimensional framework. This would explain the preservation of their DNA, the ongoing witness testimony contacts, and the apparent continuation of their wedding ceremony across more than a century. The implications of Dr. Chen's theoretical model extend beyond the Thornwick Hollow case to broader questions about the nature of human consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. If the missing wedding party members continue to exist in an alternative dimensional state, their experience may provide unprecedented insights into post-mortem consciousness and the possibility of existence beyond conventional biological death. However, the potential dangers of investigating such phenomena remain unknown and could pose risks to researchers and the broader community. The Thornwick Hollow mystery continues to evolve, with each new investigation yielding evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about reality, death, and the nature of human existence. The wedding ceremony that began on December 15, 1897, appears to be an ongoing event that transcends conventional temporal boundaries, creating a perpetual intersection between our world and something beyond human understanding. For researchers, investigators, and curious visitors, the sealed chapel in the West Virginia mountains serves as a reminder that some questions may be too dangerous to answer and some ceremonies too powerful to interrupt. The 13 souls who gathered for a simple wedding rehearsal have become something more than missing persons. They represent a gateway to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence itself. Their story continues to unfold, waiting for someone brave enough to complete the investigation that began more than 125 years ago. Until then, St. Bartholomew's Chapel stands as a monument to the unknown, a testament to the thin barriers that separate our reality from possibilities beyond imagination.